Okay, it's been a while since I made one of these recordings. This is a Citizen Speaks, and I would appreciate it if you click the like button, and of course, if you subscribe if you like the material that you hear. Uh, Today, I'm going to talk about our future, and in that context, some of the prospects that are ahead of us, particularly political election prospects. So again, I appreciate your attention. Let's get started. The sad lessons of history teach me to tremble at the chimeras that crowd our future. So often in the history of countries, men have tried to improve the ways in which they were ruled, and seldom were they successful in bringing about less suffering. The desire for freedom, justice, and fairness has often led to their opposites. The last half century has seen a deterioration of our justice system, growing persecution of individuals, and a spread of ideas whose acceptance has led to political tyranny in many parts of the world. The long process, which began with the Civil War but had its roots in the foundation of the country and even in the history of England, culminated with the election of Barack Obama as president. Many people were misled into believing that this was a great moment of change in the country's history, since the election of a man whose heritage was part African was a rejection of the legacy of slavery and of the injustices that followed the Civil War. This belief was fueled by the nearly unanimous elation of the media and the commentators, since barely any questioned the political economic principles Obama represented and avowed in the years of his ascent to the election. Few noted the unabashed socialist economic and cultural principles he and his supporters espoused. The introduction of such ideas has a long history in the U.S. These were often camouflaged behind benign names like progressive, liberal, forward-looking, but when dissected, the not so well hidden Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, and Maoist ideas were clearly expressed. Obama and his many allies who were brought into the government put these into practice. Even in his first term, there were many senior government positions to which leftists were appointed. Since the depths to which these appointments reached included civil service positions, and the pervasion of socialist ideas was guaranteed to outlast Obama's presidency. When he was successfully re-elected running against Mitt Romney, remarkable only for his lack of political distinction, the incorporation of socialist ideology into U.S. institutions was reinforced. The effort was so brazen that larger and larger groups began to recognize it by its effects, such as the printing of money and the burgeoning national debt. The transformation of government bureaucrats into socialist agents was revealed when the IRS pursued groups who disagree with their ideology. And other things like when FBI started to go against people that had not committed any kind of major crimes or felonies. Large portions of the population began to understand what was happening to the country because of the way these politicians affected them. Then, as so often happens in a country not yet at the mercy of the new rulers, out of a most unexpected direction, Donald Trump appeared. He quickly caught the attention of and won the allegiance of the millions disappointed with Obama, beginning to understand what he meant when he had promised to change America. The political leaders controlling the Democrats made the mistake of choosing Hillary Clinton, the least attractive candidate for a decisive majority of voters. Even if she had had more to offer than her litany of socialist promises wrapped in inane slogans and cliches, she would have had a rough time against an unapologetically rough opponent like Trump. The millions of voters who were finally seeing through the deception of the left had no trouble choosing the brash, tough-talking billionaire over the ultimate Washington insider, the woman who could produce tears rather than demonstrate decisive action, and who had become embroiled in one of the most transparent takeovers of government information. Although most people did not care much about the classifications of the materials she deflected to her unsecured home server, they understood that her actions were unacceptable in a government which insists on keeping sensitive information away from potential opponents. It was not only the left, but the whole Washington establishment which was caught by surprise at the election of Donald Trump. The left gave out the order for its paid and volunteer followers to begin a campaign against this president from the moment he won, so that by the time of his inauguration, the hired mobs were ready to cause trouble in Washington and anywhere else their orders directed them. Even more importantly, the thousands of leftists, well ensconced in the Washington bureaucracy with as many far-reaching tentacles throughout the country, were now enlisted to help destroy and undermine the new president. That started the endless series of attacks with which Trump's opponents countered his efforts to destroy the bureaucratic dictatorship holding power in Washington. The struggle continued throughout his term in office and culminated when the COVID pandemic spread from China to the US and the world. Without consideration for how that infection was initiated and spread, the statist bureaucrats and their political operatives saw the opportunity of using the fear and the mass psychosis it generated as an opportunity to undermine Trump's support. By terrorizing the population into accepting measures some people recognized and rejected as alien, the socialist operatives saw the opportunity to subjugate the US. In any other political or social situation, the natural reaction of the average citizen was mistrust, or at least skepticism. But in this one, fueled by the appeal to lies about science and the biased interpretation of epidemiological data, much of which was beyond the understanding of many doctors and healthcare professionals, they succeeded. The effect was the transformation of a large majority of their ordinarily individualistic, at least skeptical population into the same kind of terrified citizenry as had been subjugated over so many centuries of history, most recently by the Nazis, fascists, and communists. That was a poison for society. But most of all, it provided an opportunity for Trump's opponents to take back power. Cowering in fear of a pandemic, which was largely a creation of the bureaucrats working with the social media, people were even more easily led than before. They accepted the most unusual edicts of bureaucrats working for leftist governors who reveled in their new powers. Unfortunately, President Trump was caught in a political vice. To go after the lying agents of Big Pharma and the array of powers lined up behind them, and to dismiss Birx, Fauci, and the heads of the government health agencies who were working with them could easily have aroused the ire of the millions who believed these bureaucrats and thought them to be the ultimate authorities of medical science. Few knew then, and still many do not know now, that these doctors had not practiced medicine for many years. When confronted with recent medical results, they looked at them from an administrator's, not a doctor's, perspective. Even as epidemiologists, they had singularly biased views, not having questioned earlier responses to infectious diseases, but had simply subscribed to the dominant approaches, often more based on statistics than on individual medical diagnoses. Worse yet, the bureaucrats were part of the medical pharmaceutical complex, making large profits as shareholders in its companies. Though there were many doctors and epidemiologists who spoke up at the onset of the epidemic, particularly Dr. Bhattacharya and the Great Barrington Declaration Group, which grew to many thousands of doctors throughout the world, and even advisors of President Trump, such as Dr. Scott Atlas and Peter Navarro, he did not reject Fauci's approach and the numerous contradictory edicts coming from the NIH and the CDC. This made it easier for his opponents, since now many who had been staunch supporters of the president were wondering how he could let the absurd extensions of emergency measures continue unquestioned. Worst of all, since he and his staff were preoccupied with the pandemic and fighting attacks on him, such as the impeachment, they did not prepare for the onslaught planned by the socialist communist opposition. The election using absentee ballots and other voting practices, such as changing voting procedures in states like Pennsylvania, without the approval of the state legislature charged with the responsibility for making these changes. I do not want to rehash the well-known story, now becoming more apparent as the facts are revealed about the methods used in the elections of 2020 and 2022. The point is that what people saw in these elections and the verification of their perceptions have increased the rage of a large portion of the electorate who believed that the election of Biden was illegitimate. Now that the country is slipping into a terrifying quagmire economically and politically, and the various crimes of those responsible are being exposed, and the next presidential election is only a year and a half away, the question of how to approach that election is becoming more relevant. We must establish a few facts. Emotion is never a good basis for making decisions about voting. The way that President Trump was treated during his term in office, before, during, and after the election, are unacceptable. Donald Trump is an unusual figure in American politics. The first of the above facts is a truism. Those who disagree with the second are mostly the ones responsible for it having occurred. It is the third fact which needs dissection. Trump is unusual because of the circumstances under which he was elected, as described briefly above, but he's also an unusual candidate for 2024. We have only had one man, Grover Cleveland, elected to non-consecutive terms as president. Interestingly, he was the first Democrat in the White House after the Civil War, and he was supported by the mugwump Republicans. He lost after his first term to Benjamin Harrison, who received 100,000 fewer votes, but won a majority in the Electoral College. Those elections in the late 19th century are many worlds away from our most recent ones, but it is important for us to understand what was better then. First, voters were better informed, since people read various writings and compared them, and many who were not informed did not or could not vote. Many states required literacy as a qualification for voting. There were other ways those times differ from ours, and critics will object that women could not vote and many blacks were disenfranchised. The country faced problems related to the growth and expansion of wealth and power. In contrast, today, the U.S. is struggling with the transformation of its singularly powerful role to one challenged from many sides. Our competitors at the end of the 19th century were European powers like Great Britain and Germany. Today, partially because of the decisions of our leaders and the enormous expense of foreign entanglements and wars against which founders like George Washington warned us, we're competing with China. The prospects of that competition depend on the decisions of our leaders and the principles which they will follow in making them. So who those leaders are and what principles they hold are crucial elements in forming our future. As understood so well by the exceptional founders of this country, leadership is never a matter of an individual in a representative republic. Leaders reflect the attitudes, beliefs, and actions of those they lead. In a dictatorship, power is concentrated and imposes its will on the led. In a representative system, the power must be delegated from below so that the will of the majority determines the direction of the country. Thus, in our system, the more aware a majority of the voters are, the more likely that they will make the right choices to lead the country. So the choice of who the next presidents will be is left to the voters, who, as we know from history, are not infallible. Today, in an age when information is disseminated so differently than in the 19th century or 20th centuries, when making rational choices provides new challenges, we hope that the probability law of large numbers works to make the right decisions for the country. It is also crucial that fair elections must be guaranteed, since that is the only way that representative government works. Now that President Trump has been indicted in this transparent political case and the socialist communist political forces have again exposed their desire to undermine our system of government, the coming election will provide an even clearer choice. Do we vote to retain our rights as citizens of this country based on the principles and framework embodied in the United States Constitution? Or do we allow the pathological ideas which have disarmed large portions of that system, with the help of agitators and propagandists, to completely dismantle the remains of that system? The vast number of government bureaucrats who have run the centers of power in Washington, D.C., and have a vested interest in maintaining that power will do everything to forestall challenges to it. They have demonstrated the lengths to which they are willing to go in their pursuit of Donald Trump. They will mount an even greater attack trying to keep him and his allies from wrenching power out of their hands. Now, the opponents of the socialists and the communists and their multinational financial supporters must unite behind one man. Political divisiveness could only lead to our defeat, and with that, the end of the American dream, since there are many powerful interests ready to destroy it. Those opposed to these forces must understand that Donald Trump is not the only one able to lead the country out of this present predicament. He has certainly had a unique role in waking us up to the troubles we face. He started the movement to change our irresponsible and unrealistic ways and to turn away from the reckless, materialistic ideas of socialists and communists. He has built up a large following that reflects the country's readiness to make substantial changes. Just as at other times in history, we have had to change the direction of the country, we know that we must do this now. His opponents want Donald Trump to be nominated because they have built such an array of lies and innuendo which they will use to discredit him, that they are convinced that with the help of the mainstream and social media, they will succeed in keeping him from being elected again. If the next election is fair, and the same methods used in the last two will not undermine its results, they will be proven wrong. One way that many have suggested is to use the methods of the socialist communists against them, that is, mail-in, early voting, and, where permitted, even ballot harvesting. That is a risky proposition, but based on the experience of the recent two elections, certainly a sensible one. The problem facing an individual voter is this: are my choices Donald Trump or another Democrat, who today is the tool of the socialist communist oligarchy that serves the interests of an internationally vague association of powers? The reason that choice is unique, just as it was in the previous presidential election, is that the voter has no idea of the forces arrayed against Donald Trump. Those of us who have opposed these vague, indefinite, but according to the effects of their actions, certainly operating powers, want an individual, especially a man who has been vilified, abused, and attacked by the agents of those powers. Our reasons are clear. We want an individual leading us, not a series of chimeras leading unidentifiable individuals and groups. The trouble is with this dichotomy. We have to understand that Donald Trump alone cannot defeat them. He has many allies who share his abhorrence of the new totalitarianism. We're not choosing between Donald Trump and the powers hiding behind the cliches of equity, social justice, and world order. Our choice is to return to the constitutional system established by the founders of this republic in the 18th century, or relinquish our rights to a new socialist communist dictatorship that already has a strong hold on power in this country. If the Republican Party nominates Donald Trump for president in the upcoming election and he wins, the job of reestablishing our constitutional system could begin in his second four-year term. But that will not be enough. The many distorted interpretations and applications of the Constitution, for example, pertaining to the Interstate Commerce Clause and federal taxation of individuals, the election of senators, and the declaration of war, will take more than one presidential term to rectify. The changes required may also need new amendments to the Constitution. That may require a convention of states to consider these according to Article 5, since Congress is unlikely to pass amendments limiting its powers, like one requiring term limits. The task of returning the country to meet the requirements of the Constitution as originally written and to clean away the accrued distortions will take many years, if not decades. One presidential term will not be enough. Donald Trump may continue what he had begun in his previous term, but he will need others to complete the work. So rather than reducing our choice to Donald Trump or the forces arrayed against him, the ones which want to dismantle the basic tenets of the representative republic founded in the 18th century by our predecessors, we must see this election and the many others to follow as a commitment to return to the republic, to return to that republic, its principles and its legal foundations. The hard part of making such choices is the acceptance of our own responsibilities. Our lack of attention, our preoccupation with materialistic, self-serving concerns have led us to this point. We must reject the misleading voices of those who want to control us and manipulate us to serve their grasp of power. We must insist on learning as much of the truth as we are able to find. That will require a return to finding spiritual guidance, the only alternative to a materialistic, reductionist view of our lives, which by its nature makes it easy for temporal powers to control us, is to reach back into the spiritual traditions which inspired our founders. We must seek our guidance in the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman traditions which taught them and which were rooted in a humility that we have long abandoned. Unless we do this, the materialists and their self-proclaimed oxymoronic omnipotence will continue to lead us to perdition. That's it. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting and worthwhile, and will click the like button, and even more so subscribe to Citizen Speaks, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to you again soon. Goodbye.